Okay, let's call the meeting to order, and welcome everyone to the February meeting of the San Bernardino County Planning Commission. Let's begin by rising and pledging our allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And Michael, you have rule noted? Okay. Next on the agenda is the nominations and election for chair of the Planning Commission. Are there any nominations?
I will nominate Robert Rodriguez.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Excellent. So do you want to do the vice chair then? Do you want to switch now? Or you want me to just do vice chair?
Do vice chair.
Okay, so now we need to open up nominations for the vice chair of the Planning Commission.
I nominate Ray Pierce for vice chair.
Second.
There's a motion to nominate Commissioner Pierce as vice chair and a second by Commissioner Lowe. All in favor?
Aye.
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 All opposed? Okay. So I think, Ray, you go here.
No, I can, but that's okay. I'm comfortable here. Go ahead and you switch with Robert. How's that?
Well, okay, but you're. I think it's your duty. No, that's
I like
fine.
being close
Next time? Okay.
I like being close to legal. It gives me a feeling
It's a
of
good spot.
confidence.
Sure, that's a good spot to be. So you want to just, you and I
Oh,
switch?
you just switched? Okay.
How about if you stand up and walk around your chair and then sit back down?
There you go.
Got it, brother.
It's not that I'm a nonconformist, really.
Oh, things in Washington could happen this easily, right? All right.
All right, well, thank you, guys. First time being a planning commissioner, so I'm gonna need some guidance, and hopefully my peers will help me. If I say something out of place or I jump on something, please correct me. I don't have a problem with that. Okay, so we open all the meetings for public comment, and any public comment that's not on the agenda. No? Then we close public comment and we go to the consent agenda. And the items are consent are acknowledgement of the,
Yes, you've got the acknowledgement of public hearing notice, acknowledgement of certificate of posting, and adoption of the action minutes of January 21st, 2015.
oh,
So those items, they can, if there's no comments on the consent agenda, those items can be taken as a whole and voted on whether to accept those items and move forward.
okay. Any comments?
I move we accept the consent agenda as it stands.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So now we got number 4, a minor subdivision. And the applicant is Joe Sanger, located on 7350 Pacheco Pass Highway. And do we open that for a public hearing?
Staff.
Staff?
Yeah, staff first, and then the public hearing.
Good evening, Commissioners and Chair. Michael Krause, the Associate Planner, presenting minor subdivision 118406 Zanger. This project was continued from the January 31st, 2015 Planning Commission hearing. The project applicant proposes to subdivide one 15.05 acre parcel into 3 parcels. Parcel 1 would contain the applicant's residence on a 5.02 acre parcel. Parcel 2 and 3 would likely be used for future home sites and would contain 5.01 and 5.02 acres respectively. The property is primarily made up of native grasses with slopes ranging from 2 to 50%, and there's an aerial for you. Each proposed lot is located in areas of limited slope to allow for development on each parcel and has the ability to be served with a septic system. and each would gain access from a common driveway. This project was reviewed under an initial study, and that was prepared and circulated from November 24th to December 15th of 2014. One comment was received during that circulation period from the Sheriff's Department, and the sheriff indicated that they had no comment on the project.
Those are the best kind of comments.
Yeah, they can be. A mitigated negative declaration has been proposed as a result of the findings made during the preparation of the initial study. And staff recommends that the Planning Commission adopt both the mitigated negative declaration and mitigation monitoring and reporting program and approve minor subdivision 118406 based upon the required subdivision and CEQA findings located in the staff report and subject to the conditions of approval also contained within the staff report. And staff is available for any questions that the commission may have.
Any commissioners have any questions? So now we open it for public comment. Anybody
The
from
applicant
public?
may want to speak on it, so
Anybody want to speak on it?
Joe Zinger.
Good evening. Just as the applicant, we worked this out with staff over a period of time, and we're comfortable with all the conditions of approval. So if you have any questions of me, I'd be happy to try to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you. So, public comment is closed. What's the next thing?
Well, if there's...
Do we have a motion, you think?
Well, if there's no other commissioner
Commissioners?
comments or questions, I can make a motion.
No?
So, Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that the Planning Commission make the make the required CEQA and minor subdivision findings that are set forth in the staff report, adopt the mitigated negative declaration and the mitigation monitoring and reporting program, and that we approve minor subdivision 1184-06.
Yeah, second that?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Good luck.
Easy peasy lemon squeezy.
You're welcome.
We can close the book on 2006 now.
Hey, point of order, Barbara, what's the rule again on announcing votes? If it's unanimous, you don't have to say, right?
Yes, but let's clarify, it was a 5-0 vote.
It's, 5-0 vote.
Yeah, if it was unanimous.
The motion
Yeah, we're supposed to
passes
announce
5-0.
out the vote.
And let's say it was 4-1. Do you still, then do you say the motion passes 4-1?
Yes.
Okay. Do you have to do a roll call, like identify who the no was? Or is that in the minutes?
I think that it would be, I have to go back to the Brown Act, but I think that you can announce who voted against. It's for the ease of the public to communicate, to know how the vote went.
Okay.
Okay, then we should go to the next agenda item, the public hearing on the
Okay, I'll
vote for
present the tree
the
ordinance.
tree ordinance.
Yes. As a background to the Planning Commission, the Board of Supervisors adopted a moratorium on cutting mature trees that's 8 inches in diameter or greater in the urban area of unincorporated San Benito County. The moratorium was first adopted on October 18th, and then it was extended for it went for initial 45 days, and then it was extended for an additional 10 months and 15 days, and that happened the first meeting in December of 2014. At that time, the board announced that they would like to see back a permanent ordinance that would take the place of the moratorium, and they wanted to see it back within the 90 days. So we brought back at the yesterday's Board of Supervisors meeting a version of the tree protection ordinance that would take the place of the moratorium. I included for the Planning Commission's review the ordinance as it existed and was presented to the Board of Supervisors, and the redlined copy at the back of that Board of Supervisors agenda shows how it was changed. The redline version was how it was changed from the initial moratorium, because there were several changes that were made. The initial moratorium basically prohibited the cutting of any tree that was defined, and the tree was a living tree in the urban zones, which was RM and R1 zoning. And then there were several exemptions that were listed in the exemption section. So it was a straight prohibition. Either the tree was subject to the moratorium and then you could not cut it, or it was exempt and then you could go ahead and cut it. Once we considered a permanent tree protection ordinance, has the same basic format, but there's been a couple changes that were made. First of all, we've added a permit requirement. So if a tree is subject to the ordinance and it falls within the definition of a tree, there is now an option for somebody to request out of the planning department from the director, which would be subject to appeal to the planning commission for a permit to cut that tree, even if it's protected by the ordinance. But we also made a few other changes. And the board did not have any changes that it made to the ordinance yesterday. There was some discussion about whether or not it should have a sunset. So let me go over the rationale for that. But the majority of the board was in favor of the sunset clause. Even though we're talking about a permanent tree protection ordinance would take the place of the moratorium, because this is we have our woodlands protection ordinance, but this would actually be broader in scope, that it would protect individual trees. They want to see how it works in this county, and they wanted to have it be in place, but that if for some reason a future board does not want to continue it, they want it to be able to be easily removed. And also, we're still exploring how it's going to be functioning in this county, and we may want to make changes to it in the future. So there was a sunset provision that's currently contained in the ordinance, would have it expire on December 31st, 2020. And that means that if no action is taken in the future, this ordinance would be automatically expire and would go away without any further action by the Planning Commission or the Board of Supervisors. So we would have to review it, in 2019 or 2020 and make sure that the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors would like it continued at that point in time. Now, this is an ordinance that was kind of a compromise between two competing interests. One is the protection of trees that enhance the environment and preserve property value, et cetera. There's a lot of benefit for trees in the county. On the other hand, they didn't want it to be too restrictive and too overly burdensome on the citizens and also be a burden for staff. So there's been a number of exceptions added. One is to what extent trees in enclosed backyards should be protected. So there's been a provision that's been added that would make an exception for trees that are fully contained within a fenced back or side yard of a developed residential parcel. So that is a now exemption. So those trees would not be subject to the ordinance.
And Barbara, can I stop
Yes.
you there for a second? So no encroachment of the canopy whatsoever over the property line or over the fence line? Or?
No, I wrote it so it's the trunk is fully contained within the fenced backyard. So the canopy could go over to the neighboring property.
Okay, thank you.
Then there was a question about, okay, should we have any trees be able to be removed for any reason without going through the permit process? As it is currently drafted, there would be allow of one tree for every 5 years per parcel. That would allow a property owner to be able to remove a tree within that 5-year period of time without going through the permit procedure, but it slows down the process of removal of trees so that it's a measured removal, slow, and if they want to remove more than one tree every 5 years, it would have to go through the planning department. Then we added this section about the criteria and basis upon which the permit could be issued. And we added exemptions for certain types of trees. We added that all the fruit and nut trees are exempt from the ordinance. So if somebody has a plum tree or a pear tree in their front yard, that's not a protected tree. That is language that is included in the version that was passed out in the Planning Board of Supervisors agenda. And then it was changed yesterday as a result of the Planning Board of Supervisors meeting. Somebody pointed out that I didn't have plum trees in there, so we added plum trees, and we also added the fact that it only protects only edible varieties of the trees are exempt, not the flowering or decorative or landscape trees. So this is being brought to the Planning Commission because it's a zoning ordinance. It has to have the Planning Commission's recommendation to the Board of Supervisors. So I'm opening it up for the Planning Commission's review and recommendation regarding this ordinance. And I can further explain anything.
Anything, any comments?
Hopefully.
I've got one. We can start with me because this could put a kibosh on everything. I would like this to go in front of the Parks Commission. I'd like to get their intake, their, just whatever, they're an advisory commission. We can kind of take it as it rolls, or Barbara can. They've got expertise on that, parks people that are on there, and they have resources that we don't have. I think it would just be good to have that input before we make a decision. We've got a 7-month moratorium going, so it shouldn't, even though we're held up an extra month or so, it shouldn't create a big issue. So there you go.
Any other comments?
How does the ordinance deal with trees that are in parklands or open space?
It covers trees in the R1 and RM zones.
So trees in parklands wouldn't.
So it's
be
not an
covered.
open space. I don't know how a park would be zoned if it's like a little pocket park in a residential
Quasi-public,
zoning.
isn't it? Public or quasi-public?
But
Yeah,
there
we-
is,
We wouldn't
um,
zone it residential, and we certainly now would make sure that any park space would be zoned the appropriate, based on the lessons of the past, too.
Yeah. But that's not the reason for their input. The reason for their input is because they have much more wealth about that kind of stuff, and maybe they could add to staff input and maybe bring up some things that staff hasn't considered based on their knowledge base.
Are you saying-
It really hasn't got anything to do with county parks because, boy, we should be following our own rules first and be standing, right there as a strong example. But I think that, maybe just a look-see on their part, just to sort of bless it, if nothing else, to say, yeah, and if they do have some input, they're an advisory group to the supervisors, so people can choose to or not to take the advice.
Can't hurt.
Commissioner Lowe, any questions?
I think I'd rather hear from the public first.
So we open it for public comment?
I'm Gene Vandenheuvel, and I live at 640 Donald Drive in Hollister. And I've rise to speak on the sunset clause. I find it very difficult to understand why we're looking at a sunset clause when, in effect, this tree ordinance is going to affect our grandchildren, our children, downstream for a very, very long time. And there seems to be roadblocks coming every time I turn around. I've attended all the supervisors' meetings, I've attended the meetings at the courthouse, and I've only been living in this county for 7 years. And I'm absolutely amazed that we didn't have an ordinance in place long before now. I lived 14 years in Santa Clara. They had a tree ordinance. I lived 31 years in Capitola. They had a tree ordinance. I lived in 8 years in Merced County, in San Joaquin County. They had a tree ordinance. When the first tree came up at Ridgemark, out of the ground, I called the Planning Commission. I asked for the chairman of the Planning Commission. He wasn't available. I asked for whoever was responsible to the public with respect to the Planning Commission. The person I talked to didn't know. I asked to talk to the person who was responsible for code enforcement. She was not available. And all along the line, I'm told there is no ordinance in San Bernardino County. I find that very difficult to understand. Now we've got an ordinance that's being proposed that which has been put together very nicely. You need to be complimented. Good job. I don't know where the original ordinance came from are all the copies for the ordinances being proposed here in San Benito County, but I assume it's a combination of ordinances that have worked elsewhere. And yet we're here many months discussing this, that, the other thing, and I can't understand why. This ordinance benefits everybody, but most of all, our kids and our grandkids. Now, as I sat and listened to the Board of Supervisors last night, we have an ordinance ready to go, and all of a sudden, we have to have a sunset clause. I found that difficult to believe. Why do we need a sunset clause? These ordinances are all over the counties, Monterey County, Santa Cruz County. And what is the holdup here? Why can't we go to work and say that this ordinance is going to benefit all of us? It's going to benefit our children. Now we're arguing on a sunset clause of 5 years. And another point, we go to work and have a sunset clause for 5 years. That gives any developer that wants to come in and plan his or his dwellings downstream, and because of the Planning Commission or whoever it is going to hold up their permits and so on, no water. 5 years is for a developer is nothing. To wait 5 years and then go around this ordinance because it won't be existing anymore. I encourage you to make your recommendation to the Board of Supervisors to accept the ordinance as it is, take out the sunset clause, and I thank you.
Thank you. Any more speakers?
My name is Teresa Betancourt. I think some of you know me as Penny. I want to thank you for allowing me to address this topic this evening and your consideration. Trees are vitally important to our environment and personal health by providing cooler surroundings, cleaner air, homes for many of the nature's gifts. Before the recent devastation of the trees at Ridgemark, I hadn't given a tree ordinance any thought at all. I wish I had, as there are a number of beautiful trees that were sacrificed as a wake-up call to many of us who have been naive enough to think or to believe that the current system protects the environment when a property owner has a plan contrary to the historical use of land. The ordinance does no harm, but it does assure that an environment is not altered premature of any plan to develop. Before someone changes the historical use of land, there are a number of county codes and requirements that must be met. Without the tree ordinance, the system comes up short. The tree ordinance is just one more of those hoops that a landowner should have to be required to go through before the environment, before they alter the environment, premature of building permits, site plans, or EIRs. What has happened at Ridgemark should never happen or be repeated in San Benito County. If allowed to continue, it's a mockery to the system in place to protect the environment. It's a mockery to the officials appointed to enforce the system. It's a mockery to those that must live with the aftermath. Please know that my interest in protecting the trees of San Benito County sincerely extends beyond our community. The devastation in our community is just a wake-up call to the potential in any San Benito County community. Much thought and work has gone into a document that will protect mature trees within San Benito County, yet cause no real harm to property owners that wish to remove a tree with respectable cause. I believe County Council has accomplished that task. With that being said, I'm not sure why there's a sunset clause. You did just explain that, Barbara, and I understand a little bit better, but I do ask that you consider eliminating it or extending the sunset clause. I ask that you seriously consider the positive effect that this ordinance would have on all of San Benito County. Thank you.
Thank you.
Keep it. I'm fine taking the sunset out. Fine taking it out. Lead the charge and also.
Good evening. My name is Dan Valcasar, and I apologize for being late, so I don't know what was already said. And I don't have prepared notes, so I'll just say a couple of things. I was at the supervisors' meeting, and Barbara Thompson talked about the updates. Speaking to the sunset clause, I was surprised. It didn't make sense to me why you would have one. The point I made about the sunset clause is that if you look at it from the point of a developer, it takes you many years to develop a site, and let's just say 5 years. So if there can be some delays, or if there's a sale of the property and there's a delay in the development or the permit process, then the clause could go away before you even start. And that would be advantageous based on the history of what has happened here in Hollister and what started this whole process. Supervisor Rivas did not want the sunset clause. For some reason, Margie Barrios said that she thought it was a good idea to have it, and that this whole tree ordinance was sort of not that great, and we should be dealing with an ordinance for future development. Well, that's what this is for. This is for the future. This is for whether it's a big development that would encompass many trees, or for the future that somebody might want to cut a tree down or do some landscaping, and there's plenty of exemptions for what we would say common sense tree cutting, like fruit trees or whatever. So my perspective from what I've seen so far is that this is not real complicated, although I understand because the county has to write down what the ordinance is, that it can become very verbose. It can be need to be very detailed. But there seems to be some reasoning behind why certain entities want short terms, like a 90-day time frame to get this thing pushed through, or one more chance when we have 10 months of extension and a 1-year extension to do the ordinance. And for some reason, certain people want 90 days and 90 days, and then we're done. And then if we don't get it done, there is no ordinance. So looking at it from that perspective, and this is just little rumor stuff that I'm saying, and cut me off if I'm wrong or if I'm out of line, but I have a feeling there's some certain motivations here that should be considered. This is simply for the entire county, something that should be for the county like other counties have, and it shouldn't be overly complicated. It's not there to create problems for people. Somebody wants to, cut a tree down, it shouldn't be a major issue, and it'd be like a municipal code. The reason we have municipal codes, and we have a lot of them, is just in case somebody does something kind of silly, we have something with some teeth to do a little pushback. Otherwise, 99% of the time, we don't even enforce them. So I'm here to support the tree ordinance, and I don't think there should be a sunset clause, and I hope you guys just push it back to the supervisors and tell them to go forward. Thank you.
Thank you. No more speaker cards. Any comments from the commissioners?
I have a question. On the whereases, it speaks of urban residential areas, so that's any area that's zoned R1?
Where are you now?
Let me go to the
On
definition.
2.3. No, it's not in the definitions, that's why I'm asking the question.
It's R1 and RM zoning.
Should that be in the definitions then?
I have it under protected zone as a definition. It raises a good point. I probably should reference, I think that the protected zone is already in the section where it talks about prohibition. Let me verify. I think that I should add the words, "A tree is defined in section 25.29.212 in the protected zone," and reference that protected zone in section, the .214. Thank you. I think that that would add,
Add a definition for urban residential. Do that too.
yeah. Or I could add a definition for urban residential.
I was,
Yeah.
I guess it really doesn't matter. I just thought if there was a definition for urban residential, it would just be clearer.
Okay.
And then the only other question I have is obviously enforcement.
That-
That's the key to
That is
everything.
the issue. The county retains discretion about when and how to enforce its ordinances. So when there is a violation of this ordinance, there's several ways that it can be enforced. It can be enforced through, I'll go to the enforcement section. It can be enforced through, it's got admin citations, infractions, public nuisances, but withholding and revocation of other county permits. So there's some provisions regarding enforcement, but there is going to be time and money that's taken to do enforcement actions. And so those have to fall realistically within all the other code violations that come within the county. So, you know, it's a matter of priority.
Yeah, code enforcement is obviously the,
Pardon?
code enforcement is obviously the.
Yes, they'll be the ones that, yes.
Yeah. And then on the sunset clause, I see no reason to have that in there. Either we're going to have a tree ordinance or we're not going to have a tree ordinance. And I believe that, you know, if the board wants to look at it in 5 years just to see if it's doing everything they need it to do, that's fine. But I don't believe that we need a sunset clause in the ordinance.
Any other questions,
Yes,
Commissioners?
Mr. Chairman. I'd like to just segue to a few of the points made by Commissioner Lowe. Maybe in order. First, this is just a question. As regards the permit that's required, so that's administratively handled?
Yes. And then it would be subject to appeal to the Planning Commission,
Okay.
subject to the appeal section in that Title 25.
And Byron, I'm assuming that if you received a request for tree removal that you thought was warranted Planning Commission review, you could always kick it to the Planning Commission for review, saying that I'm not sure if like you've done in the past.
Yeah, if there's something that there's compelling reason why I would not feel comfortable
That's
sending
right.
my name to it, I always have the ability to kick it to the Planning Commission, yeah.
Okay. I don't know if that's something that needs to be codified, Barbara, in the language of the statute, but that it's subject to, or that shall be, you know, processed administratively, subject to the building and planning director's discretion to, you know, whatever, however you would wordsmith that.
Yes, I can add that.
But, you know, one person requesting a permit for tree removal for one tree, that's one thing, but a developer coming in wanting to remove 30 or 40 trees, that might make Byron or any planning and building director to take a step back and say, you know, we should really have the Planning Commission look at this in conjunction maybe with the grading permit or the conditional use permit or something.
Yes, I could add that.
And then,
And just on that point, it would be, because that is, one of the exemptions is trees to be removed as part of a development project.
Okay.
So it would be part of the plans for a specific project. We wouldn't want to look at it as an individual, we'd want to look at the whole of the project, and if you're taking down trees for the purpose of future development, then, you know, that'd be something that I don't think we'd be comfortable permitting.
right, okay. On the issue of enforcement and the penalties, Barbara, this is just brainstorming with you a little bit. You know, under the California Civil Code, the wrongful cutting of a tree is subject to treble damages for the value of the tree, which is such a stiff, onerous penalty that it serves its purpose, I think, which is to deter wrongful cutting and removal of trees by folks. And since it's already California law, query whether you could just cite to that and say one of the penalties available is that which is set forth in the California Civil Code. Because 3 times the value of a tree would make someone stop and think about it without then, and provide a level of deterrence, I think, to where it would lessen the reliance upon code enforcement, because we all know that code enforcement's tough.
Yeah, I'll have to look at that section, because how I've seen that used, isn't it usually when a neighbor cuts down a tree that's on this property, because the owner's actually cutting down the tree. You know, it's normally the owner of the property that's cutting down the tree, so
It's
is
just
that trouble damages go back to the owner, so, I mean, it doesn't go necessarily to the county, does it? I'd have to go look at that code section.
Well, yeah, it would go to, in your,
Because-
first of all, I think the Civil Code just says the wrongful removal or cutting of a tree. And if this is not permitted, if someone cuts or removes a tree in San Bernardino County, contrary to this this new ordinance, that would be wrongful.
I can look to see whether we can reference that.
Anyway, we
Yeah.
just, I just like the treble damages part of
Yeah,
it.
I like that
the
too.
fact that it's already in the civil code, because then you can just reference it, and it goes in without any kind of scrutiny, really, because it's already
And
California
it gives
law.
you another option if we can apply it.
And I think it provides a stiff deterrence for people that's not reliant on code enforcement, as I said. And then the last thing, I just wanted to echo the sentiment of Commissioner Lowe, that I don't think that a sunset clause is necessary. I think that any ordinance in the county can be and is subject to being repealed or amended or anything at any time. I don't know that having a sunset clause makes it more easily repealed or amended. Well, I mean, unless it's going to be repealed automatically, but I don't think it necessarily puts it in a better position to be amended or dealt with downstream or anything else, more than it would any other ordinance. So the question now is really, do we need a protection for the county trees for a period longer than 5 years? And I think we do.
I
think it's
can maybe just
warranted.
elaborate to see whether that affects the Planning Commission's view of that. There's several good ordinances that have been adopted in the past, and then there's changes in the board's philosophy that has, where the future board is wanting to eliminate what, a prior board thought was a valuable and necessary ordinance. And the examples would be growth management, hillside. There's been a couple that were eliminated when the change in the board occurred. And so the thought process behind that was it eliminates, if it goes away automatically, it makes it easier if a future board doesn't like it and wants to get rid of it, that you wouldn't have to have any sort of CEQA process to have it eliminated. That was one. It's easier to extend something than it is to perhaps change it or eliminate it in the future if it's a protective type ordinance that's protecting the environment. And the other thought was, I'm not sure whether that influences, how the board would vote on the ordinance, knowing that it's a permanent ordinance versus a temporary ordinance. So those were the philosophies. But the Planning Commission can recommend, if it doesn't feel like the sunset clause should be in there, then I can include that in the recommendation when it comes, if it's going to come back to the Planning Commission with these changes in it, then I can include that in the draft ordinance that the
Right.
Planning Commission is going to recommend, if that's
Well-
the will of the Planning Commission.
And obviously, it's always up to the Board of Supervisors, and all we can really do at this point is voice our individual concerns and opinions as individual commissioners. And mine is that this ordinance does not need a sunset clause.
Okay.
And let's put the onus upon future boards to change it if they want to change it. And you're right, no one knows what a future board is going to do in the year 2030, but they can figure it out then. As to right now, we value our trees in this county, and we want an ordinance that protects them, and that's the way that I see it.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Jeff, got anything? No. I've got a question for Dan. So who sets the value of the tree?
Arborists.
Well, that's scary.
Well, it is,
But
but
it's really cool, though, too.
It is
you
pretty
know?
cool, and
Yeah.
there's a whole industry out there that does that. And in fact, if a huge, beautiful maple tree in front of a single-family residential, being in the business as you are, if that tree fails or something happens to it, you can claim it on your homeowner's policy. And in order for your insurance, State Farm, to figure out how much they pay you, they do the same kind of evaluation.
Same program, yeah. But I mean, you have a massive historic tree can be huge. The
Right.
value can be huge.
Absolutely. It can dramatically affect the value of a property. And so trees do have value. We've heard that tonight through the testimony.
Sure.
Trees do have value, and as it turns out, monetary value to homeowners
yeah.
and property owners.
Very much so in urban residential environments.
Yeah, you bet.
Yeah. So, and as far as the sunset, I think that we need to relieve the sunset clause as well. I think it's just common sense, number one, but if this goes really that bad, it won't be a problem bringing it back and having it chopped off. Excuse the pun. So, so then the only question would be, we're going to take this back to the board anyway, right?
Yes, it has to go back to the board for adoption.
Okay, so would it hurt to continue this on and redirect it to parks? Would that bog it down? Because I think,
There's a-
again, any more input we could get that we might miss?
There's a few changes that have to be made anyway to incorporate what the direction from the Planning Commission is today. So if we could continue this to the next, just continue the public hearing open to the next meeting, and then we'll bring back a revised version for the Planning Commission's review. And I'm happy to present it to the Parks Commission.
Then I'd ask the commission, the consensus on if you guys feel that it would be worthwhile to send to Parks Commission to take a look at, or whether you want to just run it directly to supervisors.
Or a third option might be, excuse me, Commissioner, or Mr.
No,
Chair.
go ahead.
Or a third option might be to double track it so that it hits the Board of Supervisors with our comments and theirs, and then the board has both in front of them at the same time,
Okay.
just to save time and make it more expedient.
If Barbara's comfortable with that.
That's fine. Yes, if I have time, I'll take it to the Parks Commission in the interim before it comes back to the Planning Commission,
Okay.
so that you'll see, I have to check the next time that they're scheduled. They're scheduled for Tuesday, March 10th, so that should be able to do that and then put it on the, it'll be on the next Planning Commission's agenda, so you should have those comments. If they actually will make a recommendation at this next meeting, then we'll be able to have their comments in time for the Planning Commission to consider that.
Very good.
Works, Mr. Chair? So in
Yes.
other words, this will not hold anything up by sending it to the Parks Commission? It'll-
No.
The same timeline then, okay.
Yeah, it's basically delaying it a month. I was tentatively thinking about getting it back to the Board of Supervisors on March 17th, so that will it will put it till April, but that's okay.
In the meantime, the moratorium is still in
Still in
place, too.
Okay.
So we leave it public, open
Yes.
till next meeting?
Yes, can we continue it to a date and time certain? So it'd be 6 PM, and the date is
March 18th.
March 18th at
18th.
6 PM.
So moved.
Yeah.
I make a motion to that effect.
You make a motion?
Second it?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you,
Oh,
Barbara.
I'm
Thank you,
sorry,
Barbara.
was there any other comments? Okay. So I'll incorporate the changes that were mentioned today, and then that will be in the version that you see next meeting.
Do you have any updates on the planning? That's number 6.
I've got a couple
going?
items. Want to let the commission know that the board upheld the planning commission's decision on the Verizon tower, upheld the approval of the planning commission for that tower up on the Sunny Slope water tanks. So that's the end of that.
That's,
I also have a couple of handouts for you, if I can just, one is regarding the Monterey Bay Planning Symposium. This is being put on by AEP, which is the Association of Environmental Professionals, Monterey Bay chapter. The chapter president wanted to make sure that we were including the Planning Commission in the request to invite as many people in the planning field as we can, so I'll hand that out to the commission. I've got more if anyone else is interested. And then I also have, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the schedule, revised schedule for completion of the general plan revision of the EIR. So we are in the February county staff review period, and we hope we will be reporting back to the board on March 3rd the results of the review, and hopefully recommending that we can then release it to the public for the 45-day review. So that's where we are with the review of the general plan.
any comments from the commissioners?
Are we going to have a budget this year for workshops and California League of Cities events and so forth for commissioners?
I can look into it. We are embarking on the budget season, so I think what we've been discussing is ask for everything and then see what gets kicked out. But something like this is only $30 a person, so I can even look in our budget to see if that's something that can be accommodated
Okay.
if you're interested.
Because here's the thing on that. First, I don't think it takes a whole bunch of money to send us to a couple classes. And secondly, they are so good. I mean, you learn so much at one of these workshops or seminars. I know they sound boring and you can think of a million things you'd rather do on a Friday, but I've been to a couple and you just learn stuff you don't learn sitting here.
And there hasn't been any budget for years for staff training
Right.
either. So, I mean, when we see something like this for only $30, I mean, we'll pay for it out of our pocket if necessary.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point.
Any more comments? So, anybody make a motion to adjourn?
So moved?
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I have to get to Public Works to get it on the agenda.
Yeah, I think,
They do it, not you guys.
yeah, you might talk to, what's her name?
Urbanized,
Sarah.
urbanized area defined in subdivision ordinance.
See, wasn't that hot today? See, wasn't that hot today?
Any less than 5 acres.
That's good,
We don't want
kind
to
of
use
good.
that definition. We want to use the definition that comes out of the general plan,
We'll see.
Yeah.
because that's where the RM and R1 zone is.
Yeah.
You're right, so.